What's up, everybody? What's up, MGTOW? So in this video, I'm going to be responding to Quantum of Conscious channel. Now, if you don't know who he is, he's a guy that does kind of metaphysical stuff, and he also does critiques on the conspiracy community or conspiracy theorists. And his main thesis is that there's no way that people could, organize and control certain social events and aspects in society, and that even trying to research facts or anything like that is kind of a fool's errand. It's a ridiculous type of task, because I don't know how he looks at it, but I see it more as like confirmation bias. And yeah, there is confirmation bias where, people will look at certain facts and it all will just confirm their beliefs. But there's also some, rhetorical devices that he uses, or maybe it's just things that he actually believes. I'm not sure, because that's kind of why I'm making this video, because it's not like I'm trying to refute anything that he's saying, but it's just kind of more confusing than anything. Like, for instance, one of his main things is that, with like the confirmation bias, is that it's actually being generated by reality. It's not just that you're subjectively trying to seek out information that confirms your own bias, but more in fact that, no matter what you look at, like the reality is just going to present to you your idea. So it doesn't matter if, you believe that, let's say something like Pikachu exists, you'll find Pikachu. Or if you believe that golf balls are the size of basketballs, then you'll find people playing golf with basketball-sized balls. Which, obviously, on its face, that's ridiculous, because, yeah, there is confirmation bias, but you can't just search the universe and find anything you believe, because otherwise, like I said, somebody would have found Pikachu by now. So there's that. And I'm not saying that, people don't have confirmation bias, but I think part of his rhetoric is that you can't find facts. Like, it's beyond just confirmation bias. It's that it's like a historical view of things where, even if you try to search into history or search certain things, it could just be manipulated by this metaphysical power in reality to show you whatever you want. And so once you go down that road where you're saying that, you can't actually find real facts, you can't actually find real history, then it becomes hard to have a discussion at all. Because it's kind of like, well, what's the point? I mean, if we're saying certain things happen, well, how do you even know that happened? I mean, what's the point of even talking about it if the entire history of anything can be manipulated and changed so drastically, and every person on the planet can just be convinced by this outside force that something did or didn't happen? And how are we outside of that? And I think he uses the NPC meme, which, I think it's a funny meme, but I don't specifically believe that, there's people that don't have a soul or something like that. I think that everybody's just different, and certain people take in information and relate to the universe in a different way, and they have different worldviews. And yeah, people do go along with social conventions for the most part. And most people do. Like, for example, in Europe, when the Catholic Church was in power, the Pope didn't have to go around to every single person's house and make them read the Bible in order for Catholic social conventions and social trends to be the norm of the day. It was just something that people pick up on, and if you want to be successful in the way that society saw success, then you would just follow those trends. You didn't have to be like a student of the Bible or be like a bishop or something like that to follow those trends. Now, on the question of just how real is reality itself, I mean, that is a good question. Because, I mean, whether you look at it from a metaphysics standpoint or a materialist physics standpoint, at a certain point it does kind of get ridiculous. But I think that's just, we can't see everything, because then that's kind of like the same view that a materialist has. That, well, if you can't see or figure out what something is, then it doesn't exist. Because, yeah, okay, when we're looking at, say, for instance, like the Planck length, we can't measure anything smaller than that. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist or that reality is made up of nothing just because we can't see it. Like, for instance, I can't see Japan right now, but that doesn't mean that Japan doesn't exist. And so to say that reality breaks down is, to me, just saying that you can't measure, there's something that you can't measure or that you can't see personally from your subjective viewpoint. That doesn't mean that it's a breakdown of reality. And on the other hand, like when he's saying the breakdown of reality, because he'll present so many coincidences that are basically subjective. And these are subjective coincidences or things that may or may not even be a coincidence, and then using that as an evidence that there's no way that, somebody could plan this to happen. And I agree, like, there's coincidence and there's accidents. And I think that's part of the rhetoric, is trying to paint conspiracy theorists as people that believe that, there's gremlins or something like that manipulating every single molecule and atom in reality, and they're doing every single thing. I don't think that anybody believes that. And I think that to frame it in that way is a little bit disingenuous, because nobody's really saying that. Now, most, conservative people believe that there's such things as hierarchies, and there are hierarchies in the world, and certain people have more influence and power over events than other people, and it goes up into a chain, and then possibly there's some type of, conflict at the highest levels. But for the most part, there's certain groups of people that are following certain, trends or worldviews, or they work for certain corporations, and it is basically a top-down system. Like, for the most part. Like, again, there's things that are outside of the hierarchy, and then there's nature that's above anything that humans do. And yeah, there's a lot of coincidences and things that either don't really make sense rationally, or they're outside of the purview of a subjective human experience where we just can't understand it. But that doesn't mean that reality doesn't exist. Like, going back to, just because we can't measure something or we can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Doesn't mean that it's not happening. And so I think trying to conflate adding up a bunch of natural coincidences with trying to say that there's no hierarchy on the other hand, and that there's not powerful people that work, and it maybe not even in secret. It's just that, especially nowadays, there's so much information in the world that there's no way that a person can just go through all the information. Like, for instance, in one of my previous videos, you can see, even as biased as Wikipedia is, which it's pretty biased, there's still obvious connections in between certain companies and corporations, and they're writing articles about what they're doing. But most people, they don't either have the time or the know-how to look up all that stuff and even see that there's any type of connection between it. So that's kind of that angle of it, where he's just talking about, how reality works and trying to critique conspiracy theorists for thinking that there are certain organizations and groups of people that have agendas and that they have more influence over society than other people. I'm kind of confused on that point, because like he's saying, that's like a first grade type of thing that he's trying to rebut, where he's saying that, well, only a first grade person would think that. But like I said, you learn that 2 + 2 = 4 first before you start doing calculus. But when you're doing calculus, 2 + 2 doesn't become irrelevant just because now you're doing calculus. So when he's talking about the NPCs and the download, like, I relate that to social conventions for the most part. And I think that there is relevance, especially in the Western world, with Freemasonry, because, we can see that they founded America. Freemasons founded America. There's pretty much very little question that most, if not all, of the founding fathers, quote unquote, of the United States were members of some type of Freemasonic orders, and they kind of had a specific type of metaphysical look at reality. Now, when I look at that, and when I look at the kind of esoteric stuff, I think that there is a relevance to it. Like, for instance, if you look at not just the symbols and things on the dollar bill, but if you look at the layout of the dollar bill and how the dollar bill is, it's designed as a magic sigil. And magic sigils are typically used to control certain type of spiritual entities, and money, for the most part, is used to control people. And so then if you take that and you look at the fact that there are hierarchies, I guess if you're more conservative type of person, you believe in hierarchies, and some people have more value and more control in systems than other people. And then if you look at it, like, for instance, you have a boss, and then there's the regional managers, and then there's the CEO, and they tell each other what to do. Then you've got the shareholders, and then the shareholders borrow money from the bank. And the money goes down the system, controlling people. Like, it's just a physical reality. Like, it's not something that's like magic or being imposed from outside of the system. It's like the bankers at the top control who gets the money, who gets to borrow the money, and for what. And then those social conventions become the thing that people do because people need money to live. So, like, for instance, if you can see the historical relevance of Freemasonry, where the social conventions and the symbolic language and things like that are interwoven into American society. And probably a lot of people don't even understand why they're using the symbols, like in corporate logos and things like that. They're just doing it because they're historical relics, and it worked for other people that were successful, and so they're doing the same thing. Now, saying that, I do think that there is a much higher, metaphysical level, and however you want to look at history, like the creation of the universe, whether it's historical or it's non-temporal, it's non-historical, but either way, there is some type of, force that's imposed onto the universe that even causes physics to happen in the first place, and that's probably some type of language. And it seems to me that, secret societies and high-level religious leaders and things like that, they've picked up on the fact that that exists. And maybe it's more that they're using the language itself, and that's why it appears as if they're all using the same symbols and using the same type of, I guess, ways of looking at the universe that is not the same as your normal person. But for me, I don't believe that there's NPCs. I think that's, another thing that kind of confuses me, because everybody is somebody else to somebody else. And there's just different people, and people relate to the world in different ways. And to me, it's a bit dehumanizing. And I guess me personally, I don't believe that I'm some type of divine being or something like that that's generating reality. So to me, people are just people, and there's just different people, and trying to dehumanize people by calling them NPCs and saying that they don't have a soul, they're not generating reality, and I'm generating reality. I mean, that's a hierarchical view. And I'm not saying I don't believe in hierarchies, but to me personally, I don't see myself as being outside of humanity or having some type of special powers. Because, again, that would be the only way that you could explain how you or somebody could be outside of this force that's, basically changing facts and changing everything so that everybody else can understand how the facts and how everything else is getting changed. But, the special people, they can see it. And to me, it doesn't sit right with me. It's like, I can't explain that fully, but basically it just seems a bit subjective to believe that, I'm different than other people. When I look at people and I see people, maybe they're living their life a different way, but that doesn't make them an NPC. That doesn't make them soulless or something like that. Now, as far as people generating energy in the universe, it makes sense. Because, when you're born, you're like a tiny cell, and somehow you grow into a person, and you can run around and do all this different types of stuff, and that's transferring energy. And it seems as if that energy came from nowhere, or at least it's being translated from molecules and atoms and stuff in the food you eat, and then you grow into a person that can multiply and generate energy in a certain sense. If you build stuff or you do anything, basically it's the information transfer, it's energy transfer, and basically the universe itself is just information, and energy is just different levels and types of information. And so, on those higher levels, when you're talking about how the universe is generated and coincidence and things like that, sure, there could be all types of different coincidences and generated effects from the universe that make it appear as though certain things are happening in line with other things, and just things surrounding certain events. And especially if there's events that everyone's paying attention to, then there's going to be more coincidences, but that could just be confirmation bias. If you're just looking at it and seeing a bunch of coincidences all the time. But that doesn't discount the fact that there's hierarchies in the world, and there's people that have more influence than other people, and that a lot of those times people are generating trends and generating, culture, I guess, in the simplest terms. And people do follow that, and they might not think it through constantly, all the time. They might just say, hey, well, this trend seems to be working for these people, so I'm just going to follow this trend. And That doesn't mean they're NPCs and they're soulless and they're whatever. It's just, again, it's going back to the hierarchy and who's generating value and who's allowing certain values to even have value in the first place in the system. Now, still talking about how reality is generated, from studying a lot of the esoteric stuff like that, it does seem like there is some type of language. And I think that's where, the materialist atheists, they're kind of missing the point, because to them, words have meanings. It's not meanings have words, because they think everything's a word game when you try to talk about metaphysics. But that's because they think that words have meanings. But in reality, it's meanings have words. Because if words had meanings, then two separate languages could never be coherent. I'm not saying they couldn't, but they could not be coherent, in the sense that, say for instance, Japanese people could impose language onto the world and it would just be completely different and there would be no way to match it up with somebody that speaks English. But if you ever try to learn a different language, even just started to, you can understand that, the meaning that you're trying to convey, you're trying to find the word in that language that means what you're trying to say. It's not that the word itself has any meaning, the sound has a meaning. It's just that the meaning of something is trying to be conveyed, and then each language just has a word for that meaning. And the reality itself is probably generating that meaning. I mean, whether you want to look at it from like a utilitarian point of view, where it's just that things that have value have meaning, or, but obviously there's abstract things that have meanings. Like, for instance, like everybody knows that, if you put on like a gold medal for the Olympics, that doesn't mean that you won the Olympics. It only has like a true meaning when it's in combination with you winning that event at the Olympics. Like, it's, so there is some, overlap between abstract concepts and the physical reality that's just above just your basic, like, materialistic view of things. There's abstract things that have meaning outside of the mind of a person. And when you look at things like that, then you can kind of see that there's a whole language of these abstract things that mean things that have meaning. And you don't need a language specifically to convey it. I guess like a medal is a good example of a symbol that represents an abstract idea, because it's like like I was saying, it only means something when you actually win the Olympics. It doesn't mean anything if you just put it on and you didn't do anything. And I think even most materialists can understand that there is some type of levels of abstract meaning, while they would just think that, we're imposing that meaning onto the thing, but it's kind of up in the air, because obviously you can't just say, well, he won the Olympics and you're going to put the gold medal on him. You actually have to physically win the event for it to have a meaning. So, I mean, I guess you could look at it as if people are generating reality, but to me, it kind of falls short, because obviously people die and pass away, and they obviously aren't NPCs. Like, these are like either very influential, important people, like trendsetters and people that influence culture dramatically, like presidents and emperors and kings and things like that. And the universe is still here, even after they go away. And maybe there's just a few people that generate reality or something like that. I don't know, but I just tend not to believe. I just tend to believe that I'm just a regular person, And well, maybe I'm an NPC. Maybe I just repeat everything that I hear and, go along with the social trends. I don't know. I don't know if I do that or not. But, to me, it's just an interesting way to look at things, because it's also an easy way to just dismiss other people's viewpoints. Because if you say, well, they're an NPC and they don't believe the same thing that I believe, so that means that they're an NPC and they don't have a soul, it just makes it really easy to dismiss everything. And it also makes it easy to dismiss everything if you have this ahistorical view where facts and historical events and even historical relics can be changed at any time, in any way, whenever it just suits the situation, to say, oh, well, you can't see something here, so it didn't exist. If I don't see this happening, that means it didn't happen. Or if you are trying to research a bunch of points together and you can't actually basically reproduce history in some type of holographic computer where you're showing exactly what happened at every single second or millisecond, then there's no point in researching and trying to get to the bottom of historical events. Because, history is kind of mysterious in a way, and we can't know every single thing that can happen, but people can use, reason and try to figure out basically what happened. And for instance, if you look at the Bretton Woods era, in media, you can see that there's obvious connections, with Indiana Jones. If you watch the whole Indiana Jones series, and if you watch the Stargate series, they're basically telling the exact same story. And after or during probably World War II, up until after, there were people that were running around looking for ancient relics, and they thought that there was aliens and all this other stuff. And that's what they thought. And they were running around doing it either Indiana Jones kind of represents the Freemasonic thing. And then obviously you had the Nazis doing it too, if you look at the Indiana Jones series. And interestingly enough, if you watch the newest Stargate movie, which is supposed to be the last one, even though it's a prequel that takes place before, and then all of a sudden there's Nazis in that one too. And at first I was like, oh, what is this? Some SJW Nazi stuff. But then it kind of clicks. It's basically, Daniel Jackson is Indiana Jones. It's the same story. It's about, this guy trying to figure out all these codes and stuff, and going back to Egypt, because the first Stargate takes place in Egypt, and Indiana Jones, a lot of the time he's in North Africa looking for stuff. So you can see that, maybe it's not true or maybe it is true, but these people, whoever it is, these secret societies or whatever, they believe certain things about reality that they don't want everybody else to believe. Because maybe it makes people easier to control, or maybe it makes people just go along to get along, because if people knew that there was something above man, above, some type of metaphysical thing that gave life meaning, then they wouldn't go along to get along as much. And, you can kind of see the path that materialists have been led down, especially with quantum physics, because when they're talking about all the Planck length stuff and the muons and the neutrons and the protons, and specifically the Planck length thing, where it's okay, so we can't measure it, so it's not there. And then that's saying that reality doesn't exist, because if you're saying that the smallest building block of reality is nothing, then reality is just pointless. It's just a pointless relativistic mess, and there's no reason to do anything. There's no reason to even think about anything, if there's nothing there? So, like I'm saying, I don't specifically know, but I do think that there are people that have understood this throughout history, whether you want to call them religious leaders or secret societies. Different groups of people do understand that there is like an overarching metaphysic to reality, and that there's a language of reality. There's like a language being spoken in reality, and maybe you want to call it coincidences and things like that, and saying that, there's no way that any group of people or like any person can control and plan out all this stuff. I agree with you. I agree that there's no way that any person can plan out everything. But at the same time, it's kind of like, a surfer or something like that. Like the surfer's not controlling the wave, but he knows how to look at the wave, and he knows when to stand up on the board and when to ride it. Where somebody that has no idea what surfing is, they get on a surfboard and they get crushed and go under the ocean and almost drown. So it's the difference between that kind of where, if you don't even believe that there is some type of metaphysic, or that you can get ahead of it, or that you can see the language, or that there is even a language, then, it's going to be much harder for you to even believe that any of this stuff is even happening. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why it's so hard to convince other people that there is stuff happening. And like I said, I'm not saying that they're in control of everything, but they are doing stuff. There are groups of people. And like I said, the Masons themselves may not be as powerful as they are or were. But at the same time, now a lot of that stuff is being done out in the open because of there's being so much information that people can't see it anyway. Like there's no way for them to connect everything together, and that is probably purposeful. It's like flooding information. It's like that's how you do disinformation. You just flood so much information that the people that are trying to look at the information can't tell what's the real information from the fake information. But I don't think that people should stop trying to find out what's real and what's fake just because it's difficult, or just because there might not be a way to figure it all out. Because, like I said, to say it's all ahistorical and the facts can be changed versus saying it's confirmation bias, which that can be verified, because then outside people can come and look at the information and see if it's just confirmation bias or if there's actual facts inside the thing, versus just saying, well, no matter what you look at, it will be there. Like, it's like saying, if you look at it, if you look for Pikachu will appear in the real world, which is just not true. That's not, on certain levels, yeah, you might be able to find a drawing of Pikachu or like a stuffed Pikachu or play Pokemon, but to say that a real Pokemon will appear in the world just because you want to believe in it is different from saying that people have confirmation bias. And it's different from saying that people have, social conformity. Like, yeah, a lot of people conform socially, but that doesn't mean that they're a soulless robot. Like, it's a funny meme and stuff. Definitely. It's definitely funny, and it's definitely a good way to think about it as an analogy. But to actually say that people are, different, and that there's, some ascended masters on the planet that can, avoid some of the metaphysical, realities that exist on the planet, while other people are subject to them because they either don't have a soul or some other thing like that. It's just, I don't know. Like I said, it's dehumanizing, and people, you don't know what other people think or what other people do or why they do what they do. But mostly it's just a natural human thing to follow trends and to look at the people that are more successful and try to emulate them, because everybody can't, understand every single thing. And that's part of why, people just don't look into things. They don't, they'd much rather spend their time either trying to follow whatever the social convention of success is and just do that than try to understand the underlying metaphysics of reality. And, it gets to a point where the underlying physics of reality is kind of nonsense. I do agree. It's not that it's nonsense, but it's we'll never figure it out. We will never figure it out because it will just keep going. And when we figure out something else, then that thing will bleed to something else that we don't understand. It seems to be a trend. It seems to just keep going. But that doesn't mean that the whole world is nonsense and the whole world doesn't have meaning. It just means that we can't figure it all out. So, yeah, I think I'm kind of getting a little repetitive here. So I'm just going to say, the first grade thing, again, it's funny, but at the same time, there are things that you learn in first grade that are still relevant when you're doing calculus. And that, sure, there is some type of overarching metaphysic to reality that has a much larger percentage of control on events and things that happen than any group of even powerful people. But that doesn't mean that there's not powerful people and hierarchies that influence everything. And I just don't believe in the NPC thing, because I just don't believe that I'm different than other people. That I think everybody's a person pretty much, and maybe they don't analyze things at the same level or think about things in the same way, but that doesn't mean they don't have a soul or they're not on the same level. And yeah, that's about it. I guess check out his channel. I'll put a link down below in the comments box. Other than that, have a good day and go MGTOW.